And you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, many of you may have felt the pinch as you purchased your Easter meal this year as the cost of living continues to soar. In the 12 months to March this year, food prices have increased 5.9%. To break all of this down and to explain more and perhaps give you a few tips, I am delighted to be joined by my friend and good friend of this programme as well, Jasmine Birtles, the personal finance expert and founder of her website, Money Magpie. Good to see you. What impact specifically, I've given that general headline number of 5.9%, but what impact has the cost of living crisis had on the pocket of British households when it comes to hosting a family get-together at Easter?
Yeah, it is tough. We have seen food prices increase, just as we've seen energy and, of course, petrol increase. However, I do think that we are going to see more food price increases going forward this year. Talking to farmers, and I know, Alastair, you're very much plugged into the farming community. I'm hearing from a lot of farmers that they are concerned about food production, about food security, as we're calling it, later on this year. So in a way, I would say to people, make the most of it right now. Make the most of what you've got, even though prices certainly have gone up, as you say, up by 5.9% in the 12 months to March.
And it's interesting to note, isn't it? I know that lamb is on the list, and obviously that is something that many farmers are wrestling with right now. But also a little bit of lateral thinking here. Hot cross buns, which I absolutely adore, and obviously involve flour in their manufacturing. Flour is about Ukraine, it's about the war, and that's about rising prices. It's not just bread, it's also things like buns.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm also a huge fan of hot cross buns, have them all through the year if I possibly can. But yes, the hot cross buns themselves, as you say, flour is now more expensive. We're looking at the rising cost of bread. That's up, but those are up by 5.2%. And then butter, again, I'm a huge fan of butter, and this is a problem for me. That's up 12%. And we are potentially, I think, looking at higher prices for eggs going forward. One farmer said to me that he thinks that he may have to kill his chickens when it comes to, the summer, because he won't be able to feed them. So, eggs as well. I think dairy will be impacted by this as well as other products.
Well, and also with the avian flu thing still dribbling on and has just got much more serious in the United States of America as well. That's a problem for the industrial scale egg producers. Butter, I genuinely didn't know about that rise in butter. Is that related to the cost of dairy farming or is it supply demand?
Good point. I think it is. Well, it's a bit of both. So much of this, as you know, so much of the inflation that we're dealing with at the moment, both in food and in other areas, is because of supply chain problems, supply and demand, as you say. I think what we do have to come, honestly, is the inflation the real inflation that comes from quantitative easing, the money printing that's been going on. But just at the moment, we are particularly being hit by supply chain issues. And of course, as you say, the war. I mean, this has brought into really stark reality for us exactly where our basics come from. The fact that Ukraine, Russia produces so much of the wheat that we use, which of course goes into pasta, it goes into bread and everything. And also the potash, that which creates is a fundamental element of fertilizer, and then fertilizer covers everything. And as you well know, with your farm,
well, we've just cancelled fertilising this spring on the advice of the guy who does it for us. It's simply too expensive. I'm just going to interrupt for a few seconds. Jasmine knows exactly what she's talking about and is absolutely brilliant. But she used the expression there, quantitative easing, in case you're choking on your hot cross bun. Quantitative easing is the government and Bank of England producing lots more money, cash, actual cash, to try and boost the economy. And the inflationary problem is the old thing you'll find in any economics textbook: too much money chasing too few goods. And that's one of the key causes of inflation. I knew what she was talking about, but just in case you didn't, I hope I wasn't being condescending, but I thought I'd just explain that. I said in my introduction that you and I know each other well, and you know this programme well because of Magpie.com. And and the interaction that you have with folk who are wrestling with all of these problems, have they come up with specific ideas what they would like done to try and help them through this cost of living crisis?
Well, good point. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, one thing that we're doing at Money Magpie is that we're actually going to be running a campaign to get the government to pay our bills, because, you know, the energy bills that we've had so far have been so extreme, so huge, and it's not been our fault that they've been so huge. And we are saying now, the average bill for the average household in this country is £2,000. There are 27.8 million households. So it would cost about 54 billion for the government to pay our energy bills. So we're saying the government should this year either pay the whole of our bills or even just half. That's something we think is a reasonable thing to ask, honestly. Given that, I mean, 54 billion sounds like a lot, but it was 57 billion to open up RBS, to bail them out. 57 billion pounds was paid by the government then to bail out RBS Bank. Now, I think it's an entirely reasonable thing to ask for 54 billion, or even, you know, as I say, half of that, to look after the people's energy bills this year.
The only thing I would say, and you know, because you've heard me say it before, that if that policy were to be adopted, and I fear you know that I don't think it would be, but let's be clear with folk listening to the conversation, that would still mean that ultimately they've got to pay for it, because if the government pays for it, as Margaret Thatcher famously said, the government doesn't have any money, it only has taxpayers' revenue and borrowing. Ultimately, you've still got to pay the bill. But last time you were on, we talked... and it was an intriguing conversation because it ranged from allotments to growing your own vegetable and stuff like this. I tell you where I think the government are really failing, and that is getting the message out there about what we can do to help ourselves, whether it's on the consumption of energy and electricity or whether it is recycling food, not wasting so much. And there's an awful lot of money that can be saved there. Shouldn't the government be taking a bit more of an educational lead in that?
Well, yes, in a sense. The problem, I think, always is that you have different people at different stages. So you certainly have people who absolutely could be saving a lot more than they are. There's a lot of wastage. We waste billions of tons of food every year, good food that could be used, which, by the way, is why another campaign that I'm running is a freeganism, to make freeganism legal. And I'll talk about that if you'd like. But on the other hand, we have millions, literally millions of households that are already struggling, already on the breadline. And you know, what happens quite often when the government says, oh, you should all do this and you should all do that, is people go, well, that's patronizing. You know, look at these people who are already struggling horrendously. So if they can find a way, and governments, as you know, usually don't find a way to say this in a way that is acceptable to the electorate, then great. And one thing that they could do potentially is, as well as giving the advice, is to give the enablement, if you like. So, for example, to create more community fridges, for example, to do what I'm trying to campaign to do, to legalise freeganism, to enable supermarkets and food shops generally to literally give food away at the end of the day, and make it something that is legal to do. So if they could do both at the same time.
But if you go into a supermarket or even a convenience store, we've got a brilliant convenience store in the next village that by about 5 o'clock of an evening will then start marking the prices of stuff down because it's fresh food and they haven't sold it that day. But you can still freeze it, or you can cook it, turn it into something and then freeze that. I mean, they do that already. You said to make it legal. Why is it illegal? If they want to do that, why don't they do it?
No, it's if they want to give it away for free.
Right, OK.
So, yes, there are problems there with, people coming back to the supermarket saying, I've got food poisoning, because of the food that you gave me for free,
Yes, so I do take that point. Final point, and it actually ties together those last two bits that we talked about that I hope folk listening and watching would have found useful. It struck me the other day, talking to my wife about domestic budgets and how we shop and how we try and be aware of the fact that our energy bill's also just gone up by about 37%. She said we are beginning to change the way that we shop. We are becoming smarter as shoppers, and we are looking for bargains, and even the way that we shop. So fruit and veg, farmers markets, things like that. We are becoming smarter consumers, and that way, huge savings lie.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And many of those households that I mentioned that have been on the breadline for a while, they have got used to now going to different supermarkets for different things. They will be using online apps and websites. For example, there's a very good app called Olio and a very good app called Too Good To Go, which put you in touch with cheap food in your area. So people are doing that. What I would like to see is more of us growing our own, frankly, producing our own, so that we give ourselves more food security if we possibly can. Believe me, if I had a garden, I would. I've only got a patio, so it's a bit difficult there. But, you know, if I had any sort of garden, it would be already turned into fruit and veg, frankly.
Absolutely. And final point, because we're going to talk to Angela Knight next, but it's interesting, in the Mail, there's a big survey that's been done about all of this, and it says that 46%, damn near half, of us have cut back on our electricity use, and 45% specifically have turned the lights off. It may sound like a tedious shout from mum or granny or whoever it might be, but that does count.
It does. Absolutely. I hear my dad in my head saying, switch the lights off. It's not Blackpool illuminations here, you know.
Jasmine, always a pleasure. Keep in touch and good luck with the allotment. I hope you get up the list. And meantime, radishes in grow bags. Good.